Right, looking back on the invoice screen, let's now talk about payments received. If you receive a payment from a client for an invoice you've given them, how would you want to enter that into the system? With Easy As, you can do it whichever way you want, folks. I mean, if you want to keep it to a very basic process, you could just enter it in. You could go directly to your income screen if you wanted to and enter your payment received from your invoice. The only problem with doing that is it's not going to be aligned against your invoice number. You're not going to see here what invoice number it came from. This line here says from a credit note or from an invoice. So if it was from a credit note, you would see a C after the number if you issued a credit note to a client. Apart from that, if you don't see a C, that is always going to be an invoice. So if you don't record it against the invoice, you've got no way of, because you can't actually type that in there, folks. See, that doesn't work. You can't type a invoice number there. That is automatically given from the system. And to achieve that is, you have to use the payment received on the invoice screen. So if you're receiving a payment from a client from invoices, naturally you're going to record it against the invoice. So let's say that our Mr. Smith here paid us the whole amount of the invoice. We would click payment received yes, or we click this icon here. Okay, we've got payment received. See that it says no. The ones that say no haven't been received any money. The one that says yes, we've received money. But see the right hand side here, see it's got one dot? That means that this client's paid in full. Where it's got two dots means that this particular client only paid a partial amount. He did not pay the whole invoice. So we know that any with two dots are partial. So if we look up the top here and we click partial, it allows us to, it filters to the screen all invoices that have only received partial amounts on. We can click here and we see all invoices that are completed with the one dot. Notice that? And click here, we see all invoices with total amounts outstanding where nothing's been paid yet to date on the invoice. Okay, so that's what those icons are for. All naturally returns all to the screen. So let's say, for example, Mr. Smith has paid us the total amount owing on his invoice. We'll click here on the payment received icon. Click this. It pops up with this on the screen and it says, do you want to add this to income? Well, of course we do. I don't know of a reason why you wouldn't add it to income. So we click yes, and this screen comes up. Now, all we need to do with Mr. Smith is this. By default, when you first open the screen up, this is how it's going to look. If you click this icon here, it allows you the ability to enter partial payments received from clients. Now, you can leave that on at all times. It's irrelevant. As long as if this is left blank and you click done, it registers that you've received a full payment from the client. And I'll show you that. If I click, how did the client pay? He paid by cash. Let's say that that was the date the client paid me, because it's going to come up with the date of the invoice or today's date. I'm not quite sure which one that is. But it comes up here with today's date, I think it is. So he's by default. So he pays by cash. It automatically has brought up the project group, because that was the project group that was automatically assigned by the invoice. Originally we had allotted that invoice against project group Smith Street. So naturally it's going to put that into that project group when it puts it into the income automatically for us. These two boxes here come up because they are the additional boxes or the additional columns that are provided on the income screen. If you've turned on additional columns, these two boxes will show. If you don't have additional columns turned on, these two boxes actually don't appear on this screen. So if you are receiving a payment from a client and it's a payment in full for an invoice, all that you really have to do is enter in the information into the top part of the screen. When you've entered this here, if you click done, Easy As instantly knows that this is for the full amount of the invoice, whatever the invoice total was. So when I click done, it will record that instantly against the invoice. And you can click a receipt if you issue receipts to clients, or click no if you don't do that. So now, what happens on the invoice screen? Have a look here, it says payment received yes, and it's got a little asterisk here. That tells us instantly that that was a payment. All payments have been received in full for that particular invoice. Now if I jump over to the income screen and have a look at that, I will see that that exists. But jump over and I look for that invoice number. It's naturally in date order, and it just happens to be that it's the last invoice anyway. And there is the invoice here. It appears that that payment there is the full payment of the invoice, showing the amount of sales tax that was applicable, etc. It's all done for us. And if I double click on this now, it will open up the invoice screen, and it will filter that invoice to the screen. So it says, oh, there's the invoice number that was recorded. So if I come back and say, what was that amount for? That's on the income screen. I quickly look at the invoice. I go, oh yeah, that's right. It was this particular invoice here. I can even click edit to have a look at what the invoice was about. I go, yep, that's fine. So now when I close that, it's going to jump back to the income screen because that's where it previously was. Okay, so that's how that appears. Now, if say this was a partial amount, let's say I'm only receiving a partial amount on an invoice. So I'm going to jump to another one of those invoices here. Okay, so I'm going to find one that I'm receiving a partial payment again. So let's select this last invoice I used earlier, this dummy invoice I put in there. Let's just say that I'm only receiving a partial payment from this client. So I'm going to click payment received yes, pay it to income. I'm going to record it as a partial payment. So what do? I enter in all the boxes that I want to enter in at the top here. Naturally, this has to be entered in and this has to be entered in. These are mandatory boxes. Okay. Now, let's say that that's all the information I want up here. I then come down here and I go, how much is this client paying? Because the amount of this invoice is $854, I'm going to say that, let's say this client's only paying me, let's assume that this client's only paying me $400. I could then enter in the $400 and the sales tax amount. Naturally, I'm not going to know how much sales tax is applicable on the $400, so I'll just simply click my calculate button. That's the default rate of sales tax that the system has. Obviously, that's going to come up whatever you've entered in as the default rate for your country. I'm going to enter in 400. I'm going to press enter or click the OK button, whichever you do, and it instantly puts it back here. It calculates how much sales tax is applicable there. So if I click done now, you will notice I don't want a receipt. It's now placed 2 asterisks here. That's because it's saying that only a partial payment has been received. And if I was to go back to the income screen, you would see all the evidence of that as shown before. So what happens now? What happens if I now receive another payment from this client? If I now receive the balance of the income, the payment from this client, the balance of $454.50, I now come back and I click this same icon. I don't have to do anything different. I just click the same icon. I'm recording another payment received. So I click this same icon and it comes up with a different screen now. It comes up with this screen here and it shows you that this was a previous amount that was received from the client. This is the amount outstanding according to the information we've put in. If we enter the information wrong, this is naturally going to be wrong as well. But we know we've entered it correct. This is the amount outstanding. This is the amount that the client's actually paying me now. So I'm going to enter in the balance that's outstanding, which is $454.50, I think it was. Is that what it is? $454.50. Okay. And if I click complete this transaction, it now has recorded that against the client. The only difference, the only problem we now see is that it's still recorded as partial payments. The system is dumb. Most accounting programs are dumb. It doesn't know that it's been received in full. So once you've received full payments, the only other step you've got to do is jump back in here. You see the amount owing 0. We've received payments in full. So all we need to do now is to mark this invoice as having been paid in full. So we click this here, mark it as paid in full, and now it's paid in full.